Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to another Fine Points. And obviously, if it's Fine Points, we're here with Bruce Fein. And as we did last week, we're continuing to, excuse me, invite other people to become part of a panel discussion. This week, I'm very pleased to have Josh Sigurdson. And I hope I got that right. I think
it's close enough.
Close enough. I think I did the accent wrong. After you told me, I still messed it up. Sorry.
It's all good.
My bad. And really happy to have a conversation. I'm going to start it off today by saying the name that I believe every American should be repeating. His name is Abrego Garcia. Okay. Who is Abrego Garcia? And shame on you if you don't know who Abrego Garcia is. Abrego Garcia is the individual who was sent to El Salvador by what's called an oversight, okay, an administrative mistake, okay. I'm sure everybody would like the consequences of a simple administrative mistake to be that you're picked up, put on a plane, sent to an El Salvador hellhole prison, and then have your government that after said, oopsie, it was a mistake, but there's nothing else I can do about it, okay? So if this is the best that this administration can do, it's pathetic, okay? Supposedly, MAGA claims this is the art of the deal, the master negotiator, the guy who can extract any prisoner of war anywhere in the world, supposedly cannot call up Nayib Bukele and say, hey, Nayib, we paid you a lot of money. We sent a lot of business over to you. He shouldn't be there. Send him back. And we're supposed to believe Nayib would say no, okay? So Kristi Noem was there in person. You think Kristi Noem, while she was there looking at the prisoners, and you think she went up to, Abrego Garcia and said, I'm sorry, I'm going to be here and do all our best, and I'm going to have the embassy. Do you think she'd do that? Or is the attitude of the administration saying, I don't give a shit, okay? I don't want you back in the country. I'm happy I made the mistake because I'm happy you're not in the country anymore. Okay. And that's obviously got to be the case. Okay. Because if it wasn't the case, there'd be an effort to bring Abrego Garcia back. And
Jeffrey, Kristi Noem had there was a $70,000 Rolex watch. She could have ransomed him right away. she brought all the money ready to go, but decided, like Marie Antoinette, let them buy Rolex watches and have a good time in prison. I mean, this is really insane.
It's even worse than this. Okay, when they did the filing, and then I will leave it for Bruce and Josh to comment on. Okay, when they filed it, they're challenging the court's ability to ask for this person to be returned because they said even though this person is not really an alien enemy, whatever they did under the alien enemy is not subject to any sort of judicial review. So since what they did, even if it's wrong, even if it's a mistake, even if the person shouldn't have been sent, it's still not subject to judicial review. So there's nothing for the courts to do about the issue because this is all about the presidential prerogative. And they further added that neither money nor effort of conversation will seem to be able to extract Abrego Garcia from prison, okay? So I wonder how many people, well, Trump said it, so I guess 100% of MAGA will believe it. Really appalling. And so people still want to insist to give Trump this type of authority under the Alien Enemies Act without any judicial review whatsoever. And again, we're not talking about, got to make it clear over and over again, we're not talking about putting criminals on the streets, okay? We're talking about, like we do in our society, We prove a criminal to be a criminal. And once we prove a criminal to be a criminal, we put them in jail. So if they're criminals, they will be in prison, okay? But they will have faced a trial. They will have had due process. So the point of due process is to protect the innocent, okay? I understand how MAGA, that's a very difficult concept of protecting the innocent, except for those on January 6th. Then there's a lot of concern about due process. So there seems to be a lot of due process about people, who tried to overthrow, an election on January 6th by preventing Congress from certifying Biden as president. So there's great concern about all the processes of due process and legal processes, but about this cohort of people, okay, who cares? Okay, it's not them, so who cares?
Well, I mean, the left and the right both do this. And at the end of the day, we have team sports here. So we have one side that will do this and the other side will call them out. And then the next cycle around, the other side will do the same thing. And then the other side will call them out. And of course, we don't have any consistency because in this world of collectivism, we have the team sports of whoever wins the Super Bowl, right? And those are the guys that deserve the trophy and they can do whatever they want with that trophy. I mean, what we've witnessed with Trump is unbelievable because he has gone across the board on everything that, his people, his supporters have been calling out for the last 10 years, especially. The free speech movement is out the door. We're seeing it on multiple different sides. I mean, if free speech absolutism means free speech absolutism, there is no middle ground there. You are either pro free speech or anti free speech here. And when we're looking at, these people that are rounded up, and by the way, it's happening in El Salvador as well. People are just taken off the streets, and many of them are just innocent and, maybe made a mistake once and sold something on the street with a friend of theirs. And now they're piled in to the same group of people that, are mass murdering people over there. We're seeing the same thing on university campuses and stuff. Look, I'm not a big fan of far left university students told what to say and protest by academic professors. But at the same time, we're witnessing people that are, on a legal green card in the United States being taken off the streets and sent back to their country for criticizing Israel. So, of course, we have a major issue here when the people that support Trump usually would say, this is terrible, this is tyranny. If Biden did it, and Biden did do some things very similar to this, but not to the same scale. What a terrible person. We got to stop Biden. But then Trump does it and, it's their team. And he says things that they call, quote unquote, based. So therefore, he must be on the right side of history and nothing he does could possibly be wrong. And that is the outlook that so many people have among the mega maniacs out there, which is that you can take people off the street if they say something we don't agree with, or if they are involved in something, or even not involved in something, suspected of being involved in something without any due process, taken off the streets and sent to another country. That is extremely concerning. And that is only the tip of the iceberg, because that is only going to explode and snowball into a much bigger issue if left unchecked.
Yeah, I think what you're underscoring is that we have an epidemic of constitutional illiteracy and non-commitment. Mm-hmm. People have no idea that free speech means free speech for the speech you hate. The speech that you love, you don't need to have free speech protection for. These are understandings voiced by our most luminous Supreme Court justices, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Louis Brandeis. You are a very weak, anemic people if you can't tolerate the idea that someone may say something with which you disagree. That's why I find appalling, even on the campuses, even before Trump, this idea of microaggressions. Microaggressions is a pejorative for free speech. Yeah, well, you say something I might not agree to you, and this is on academia. You have safe spaces where you don't have to confront an idea, where you might learn something, because maybe when you're born, you're not omniscient. Maybe you have something to learn. So it's far deeper. Trump has taken it to a new level, but the whole cultural degradation and decay is truly stunning. And people don't understand that when they make these ad hoc and very provisional condemnations of an idea, it'll come back to haunt them. The sword's double-edged. And so what you're going to do when you shortchange due process for X, it's going to come back. And when you don't have the power, it's going to come back and haunt you. But what we're seeing, I believe, is a pattern throughout history. The oppressed become the oppressors as soon as they get a chance. So the Trumpists who celebrated free speech, as soon as they get a chance to suppress it, then it's all out the window. You say anything they don't like, you're a terrorist, you're anti-American, you're untrustworthy, we're going to go after you. Even if you're a lawyer, you defend somebody you don't like, we'll block you from federal buildings, you don't have any contracts anymore, you can't get visas, no one in your law firm can join the federal government again. I mean, this is clearly the mindset of a fanatic. And it's not all that distinguishable, if it is at all, from the Third Reich with Nazism. And that's unfortunately we got Nazism without the burning of the Reichstag. We have our legislative branch of government has just given up and surrendered all the power that it's had to the White House. And then whoever is succeeding Trump, which is alarming, I don't think he'll try for a third term, but he could. This presidents do not give back power. All the power that Trump asserts is not going to be surrendered by a successor. We got a one-way ratchet to getting back to King George III and monarchy. And that's clearly where we're headed. And it's so appalling. I read an editorial in the Washington Post the other day that said they used the word, it was disheartening, that the head of ICE said, well, he didn't care what the courts were going to do. They were going to do their job anyway because Trump was elected. The word disheartening, this is the Washington Post of Woodward and Bernstein and Watergate fame. This is taking euphemisms to a new level.
Well, Bruce, you mentioned the oppressed become the oppressors, and that's actually there's a psychological case for that as well, going back to looking at crime statistics. For example, the vast majority of people who murder people, the vast majority of people who abuse children were indeed abused themselves as kids, and they feel like they've been weakened, they feel like they've been attacked and targeted, therefore they go nuclear when they get a chance at power. In some ways it means murder, and in some ways it means politics, and sometimes it's hard to discern between the two. And it's something that I think about a lot with these patterns where we look back at the 1960s, the anti-establishment was the left. Again, the 1980s, it's a 20-year cycle. The 1980s, we saw the anti-establishment were further on the right. And then, of course, fast forward to the Bush years, the anti-establishment became the left again in the early 2000s. And then they stayed sitting on their hands under Obama. Then, of course, we see, what they call the abuse of Trump. And yeah, there's a lot of fake stories out there in the news. They remember the mainstream media focuses on all the wrong things with Trump, not the things that are actually most important. They frame stories as if he's, doing all these things that he's not doing while ignoring these horrible things that he's doing over here, so that they frame the opposition. Now in the 2020s, we have the right as the anti-establishment again. They are manufactured, I believe, by the media in this way. So we have that back and forth, and now the oppressed become the oppressors. And of course, because people will say, well, I've been beaten down, I've been attacked, I've been, abused in the media, I've been lied about by the mainstream media and all this kind of stuff. They will say, because of that, therefore, I have the right, essentially, to do these horrible things over here. And I mean, we're seeing that across the board between the people that, you have the crazed people on the left with like the trans kids, push. And on the right, you have this idea of what we saw recently, the restriction on criticizing Israel, where if you are pro free speech, one of the things I have to say is, regardless of if you agree with something or not, you always have to support other people's right to say it. And one of those things being, now they're saying you can be deported if you weren't born in the United States. And even if you're legally there, you could be deported for criticizing Israel. They call it anti-Semitism. But of course, while there are people that are anti-Semites, there's a lot of people that are just critical of political policy. And of course, they're lumped in. But even if they were anti-Semitic, no matter what you feel about it, they have a right to dislike an ideology and an entire group. Even if you think it's abhorrent, everyone has a right to dislike an entire group and be a collectivist. That everyone has a right to do that. And free speech comes down to the basis of, as long as you're not threatening to hurt someone, as long as you're not threatening to conspire to cause some major criminal act, then it's not an issue if you don't like Jewish people, or if you don't like Muslims, or if you don't like Christians, whatever it might be. But we've set a precedent recently, and everyone's sitting on their hands and looking the other way with this, where we have Kristi Noem saying we need to ban all criticism of Israel on college campuses. Now we have this most recent order that says that you can be deported if you say negative things about Israel. And it's happening. We've seen videos of a young woman getting pulled off the street by police in plain clothes and sent out of the country. And where's the due process there? It's just they dictate it. They sign a paper. They say you're out.
It shows how completely moronic this is, because the most Orthodox Jews believe Zionism is like the golden calf, because you put worship of the country above worship of God or the Talmud.
Exactly.
So you're saying, so these morons believe that when you echo the greatest rabbis in their view of Judaism being a religion, not a country, then you're anti-Semitic. Really? Are the rabbis anti-Semitic too? Pretty soon they'll call Moses anti-Semitic. I mean, these are complete stupid imbeciles.
Jewish groups participated in these rallies. There was significant protests against the war in Israel itself. It's just false, this statement, and clearly Palestinians are human beings, and asserting rights of any human being should not be deemed as an anti-Semitic content.
Moreover,
we're broadening the definition of what is anti-Semitism. And the curious thing is, to a great extent, it's mostly non-Jews who are broadening this definition of anti-Semitism. I don't know how. There might be some radical Jewish groups that support this stuff, but I would have said many Jews are probably appalled by themselves by this application. Two Israelis, I published it in my Substack, published an article in a publication saying they were appalled at this. And these are two Israeli academic Jews who said, that they shouldn't conflate people's opinion towards anti-Semitism and the actions of the Israeli government, and all government actions are subject to criticism. So, and you could criticize a government without criticizing a religion, and the religion has not been criticized. What has been criticized is a certain concept of a nationalistic perspective of Zionism. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and you talk about defining factors like this. It's like we have, for example, a plethora of young white female university students deciding what is or is not anti-Black. And then you talk to someone that's African American, and they're like, I don't define it this way, but these people that want to be do-gooders will define it in their own way. And and even the fact that most of the people, the vast majority of people that are speaking out against Israel aren't actually anti-Semitic. Even if there are people that are anti-Semitic, as long as they aren't actually threatening violence, they have a right to be anti-Semitic, just like you have a right to be anti-Christian and a right to be anti-Muslim. Of course, people could call it abhorrent, but as long as they're not threatening violence or threatening any action against someone that would impede their ability to.
Anti-Semitic act is if you find somebody with a kippah and you beat them up.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you find a store with the Star of David outside, and you decide to vandalize it specifically because it has a Star of David outside. Right. Or you see a synagogue and you vandalize a synagogue. Okay, those are anti-Semitic acts, and those anti-Semitic acts are actually considered hate crimes. And there is a legal definition, of a hate crime. Right. And yet, how many of these people who have been involved in these protests have been committing any hate crime? Have they gone out to synagogues and blown up a synagogue? Have they been going to Jewish cemeteries, putting swastikas on them? Have they been going around to seeing all the Jewish students they can find and beating them up? But
it was the reverse at UCLA, Jeffrey. It was the reverse. It was the Palestinians getting beat up by the Jews. And I want to underscore as well, if you're looking at what the Palestinian aspiration is, it's an echo of the United States American Declaration. The right of self-government, unalienable rights to life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness. Why do they not? They're a majority in Gaza, the West Bank. Why don't they have a right to establish their own nation? That's what we fought for. That's what July 4th, 1776 was about. So when we condemn Palestinians for seeking and having the same aspiration of Wheathead in July 4th, 1776. That takes hypocrisy to a new level. We are supporting the country that is trying to squelch, suppress the right that we fought for against King George III. You'd figure we would be on the side of the Palestinians and against the King George III successors.
And it's ironic where the narrative stands right now, considering the fact that millions and millions of Muslims in the Middle East have been massacred in the last 25 years. And of course, there's only one group that's extremely targeted right now. They're the ones that are being targeted. No one else is being targeted. Well, what did we just see in Syria with HTS, formerly Al-Nusra Front, which gets arms from Israel and is a Wahhabist group, by the way, that supports forcing women to cover up completely. They're not allowed to work. They have to follow their husband 10 feet behind, all this kind of stuff. We see a group of Muslims in the Middle East that have been massacred, and then we see it go to the Stone Age within 5 to 10 years after. And then we see the same thing, for example, in Canada. I'm originally from Canada, and I've witnessed, and I'm part Native American myself, and I'm not talking Elizabeth Warren level. I actually have a lot of Native American blood in me, and I've witnessed, churches get burned down by Native Americans in massive numbers in Canada and parts of the United States. And they justify it saying, well, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, these things happened. But of course, when it's another sect or another group, then no one's going to look in that direction. It's hypocrisy. We have churches getting burned down in Syria right now alongside mosques. We have, and look, I'm not a big fan of Zelensky at all, the corrupt government of Ukraine, but people they always pretend it has to be this side or the other. In Russia, they lock you up if you criticize the Orthodox Church. So if we are going to allow this kind of metric to be moved or the walls to be closed in the United States, we are going to witness the exact opposite of the purpose of the founding of the United States in the first place, which we've already basically done with through taxation and all these other moves, the Patriot Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, all these things that have been moving the walls in for all these years that bastardize the idea of the Constitution, and of course the idea of that which the country was founded on. We're so far past that at this point that it wouldn't shock me if the walls can be closed in completely at this point, because they've already basically drawn up the blueprints for this. They've already essentially said, we don't give a damn about the Constitution. We're doing all these things, and who's going to stop us? And we saw that under the last, 80 years of presidents. I would actually argue we've seen it nonstop since Woodrow Wilson removed Calvin Coolidge from that mix. And so it's been basically them setting the bar lower all the time.
I think it began a little bit earlier. I think it began with in earnest with William McKinley in the Spanish-American War, lying about the USS Maine, and then deciding, even though we were fighting Cuba, we'd go in the Philippines and Puerto Rico, and then suppress the Philippines' right to self-determination, committed war crimes there, did waterboarding there. And basically, I think that what you're pointing out is that we cut a Faustian bargain. No longer was liberty going to be our glory. The March of the Mind wasn't our glory. Hey, here's our chance to succeed the British Empire. We can be a bully like the British Empire. And we could get the juvenile thrill of telling other people we're better than them. Or in Madeleine Albright's world, we stand taller than everybody else. We see farther than everybody else. We're the only ones that fight for liberty and justice, and therefore you should welcome us when we enter and invade your sovereignty. And it's been downhill ever since then. All the war power goes to the president. The surveillance power goes to the president. There's no oversight anymore. Spends on his own, does everything on his own. And they believe now that an election can override the United States Constitution. Whereas the framers understood, no way, that we're going to have certain principles we know majorities will not understand. They'll be too stupid. And we need to protect themselves from their own self-ruination. And that's why we have these standards. It's what we did in the middle of World War II, when the Supreme Court said you couldn't force a little girl who's Jehovah's Witness to salute the flag because you wanted to inculcate patriotism. You couldn't do that because the Bill of Rights is not subject to elections. And that is all lost on these people. They say, well, we want a big landslide. Well, it's far less than Roosevelt won in 1936, or Richard Nixon won in 1972, and they couldn't flout the Constitution. but somehow our illiteracy makes them think, it really doesn't mean anything.
It wasn't a landslide. Only one election had a smaller popular margin victory in this century, and that was 2000. So since the Bush Gore election of 2000, okay, the margin of difference of the one who got the most popular vote, this was the second smallest margin. So that's not a of course when you sit and impose when you sit and you declare a tariff and trade war as Liberation Day, okay, the bastardization of language, okay. So the bastardization of language also occurred, in these filings, because what are they claiming? They're claiming is that this is if you look at the words that they use the words of people being members or associates, okay? So I don't know what someone means by association, okay? With you're not a member, but you're associate. So what's the criteria for being an associate? So who knows what they just throw these words in because they won't be able to prove they're a member, so they have to prove that there's some level of relationship between them. I guess if you live in the same building, you're an associate. If you ever bumped into them on the street, you're associate. If you wear a tattoo, you're associate. So there is no precise, they haven't provided any precise definition of what it means to be not a member, but an associate, of TDA. Okay. Then they claim that this is an irregular war. Okay. So their accusation is irregular wars don't need congressional authorization. Okay. So I want to where do we find that in the Constitution? Where do we find that? Okay, then all we need to do is say we're in a regular war and we don't need to go. We don't need. Here's what we need to do. Perfect plan. Okay.
Yeah,
I don't need to fund it. I'm going to create tariffs. I'm going to tariff the world. Take the tariff of the world and build this. Put it into my external revenue service. Okay. That I get to write the checks on. That's money that goes to the Treasury Department, okay? But under trust in my name that I get to write the checks. And then I can fight all the irregular wars I want and do all this stuff without congressional authorization. People actually believe that the president has this power and that the framers designed the Constitution for a president to do all this stuff.
Yeah. But
how absurd is it that people believe that all you need to do is say emergency, okay, and therefore I can take over congressional's responsibility for raising money.
Yeah, well,
and then,
emergency
say regular war, and I can do whatever I want, subject to nobody's oversight or any judicial review, because I claim it's an irregular war, and I get to define what a regular war is, and nobody can challenge my definition of what an irregular war is. How can anybody with a brain, okay, really think this makes sense?
Well, Jeffrey, it began earlier because you go back to Harry Truman called the Korean War a police action, right? Now the difference between then and now is when he told the Supreme Court it's a police action in Youngstown Sheet and Tube, he lost.
Yes.
And they said, no, you can't say it's a police action, declare these emergencies and seize steel mills. There was pushback. Okay. The difference is today, there's no pushback.
Did Harry Truman say that the courts had no right to make a judgment?
No. He had to comply with the Supreme Court told him he had to give it back.
That was different. He tried to abuse language to do what he wanted, and the courts smacked him. Okay. Yeah. But he never did he go out and call all the judges radical lunatics, traitors for doing that? That's an illegitimate courts. How did he describe the courts after the ruling?
No. He complied, and of course, he didn't call for their impeachment because they're radical lunatics or things of that sort.
Did he say they were interfering with his presidential prerogative and that he had the right and they shouldn't even be given an opinion on it? Did he say that?
No, of course not.
So the point is there is no precedent for the claims Trump is making. Okay.
Yes, he's taking it to a new level. My only underscoring is that this didn't just fall out of the sky. It's building towards that way. So, what's that? It's not all that different than the made up story about the second torpedo attack in the Gulf of Tonkin, to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Lies. And I know, and Jeffrey, the government told lies to the U.S. Supreme Court, certainly in the Japanese concentration camp cases. They knew that, and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said, we do not need concentration camps. We can look at the Japanese case by case and find out where they're espionage. And the U.S. Supreme Court was told knowingly by the Justice Department, to the Occidental eye, all Japs look alike. We can't do a case-by-case examination to determine which ones are spies, and therefore we have to have concentration camps. And they knew that was a lie. And that was the reason why, after these verdicts were upheld, 20 years later, when the information came out, they all got their verdicts reversed. The same thing happened with the Pentagon Papers case. Melvin Laird, in his memoir, said, I wasn't going to sign an affidavit saying there's any national security information in the Pentagon Papers. There is. But the government argued anyway. Oh, all the world will collapse if these papers are published. Nothing happened. So we have institutionalized government lying. But I agree with you, Jeffrey, that the incidence of lying makes a difference. Now the incidence is so overwhelming, it is like living in a Mad Hatter's Tea Party, and a word means whatever the president wants it to mean. And that's why it would not shock me if Mr. President Trump got up tomorrow, issued an executive order saying, we are now installing the geocentric theory of the universe over the heliocentric because we need to restore Earth to the center of our being. You know, these radical lunatics ousted the Earth, which was the center of the universe in the Old Testament, and now we're getting back there. You know, I mean, that's the kind of lunatics we're living with.
Yeah, actually, I want to also bring some context to a lot of these issues that people try to justify, because people are rather emotional with these issues. No matter how important the legal framework of all this is, and to understand it is, there's going to be those people that will say, I don't care. I don't care about due process. I don't care about any of these things because those guys are over there are bad, or these people over there are bad, and we have to be careful about them and we have to get rid of them. And of course, that's absurd. But of course, we are living in a world filled with very emotional people that base their arguments on emotion rather than the legal precedent. And the context of which I want to kind of go into briefly here is I currently live in Mexico, and everyone knows in Mexico that the cartels have been heavily armed and funded through the U.S. through the CIA. Everyone knows it. It's been exposed countless times before. But of course, and I've interviewed people like Freeway Rick Ross from L.A., who was heavily involved in the relations between the CIA and Nicaragua, and made an insane amount of money and ended up going to jail back in the late 1990s. So the context, they say, well, look at these people over there. They're dangerous. They're coming into our country. We need to get rid of them. Or maybe they're involved in gangs. We need to get rid of them. Or perhaps, these people are supporting Wahhabi terrorists overseas because they don't support Israel. So we need to get rid of them. The context is these groups that they utilize as the fear campaign of why we need to break all these laws and destroy the Constitution. The whole idea of it is wrong to begin with, because we know that the CIA armed and funded a bunch of cartels. We know that they were involved heavily in arming and funding groups in the Middle East like ISIS. Marco Rubio, who's currently the Secretary of State, helped arm ISIL in Libya in around 2012, and of course at the behest of Obama, but of course with John McCain and Lindsey Graham. And this is very well known. They took photos with these militant leaders while in Libya after overthrowing that government. I lived in Egypt. Talked to anyone over there, they were absolutely disgusted with Hillary Clinton and actually supported Trump until recently, when he started really going after dropping bombs in all these places. He did in his first term, but it was more on the down low compared to what we see today. He's just blatantly bombing Yemen now. But with that, I want to make it clear that these groups that they utilize as a reason, the fear-mongering campaign is based on this as a reason for going after these countries. They were armed and funded by the West in the first place. And of course, Hamas was heavily armed and funded by Israel in the past. HTS, Al-Nusra Front, was armed. Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Mujahideen. We could go back. And of course, we could go into all these countries that were currently close to at war with. Iran, 1953 military coup. A bunch of U.S. weapons somehow also end up in the hands of the Ayatollahs when they fought back against the U.S. government. I mean, to me, it seems so fabricated, so manufactured. And what we see now in Mexico, let's go after these extremists. Let's call them terrorists. You armed them in the first place. And now you're going to come into the country, do unconstitutional airstrikes, which is what Pete Hegseth says he wants to do, and then risk destroying one of, by the way, the most conservative, family-oriented countries in the world, which is where I am here in Mexico. Incredibly family-oriented place. It's exactly what American conservatives claim they are supportive of, but most of them have never actually been here or actually met people or talked to families. The context of the fear mongering is complete nonsense. So again, people will have that emotional reaction to the news that they are fed by the mainstream and alternative media, as I should point out. And of course, then they will throw the legal precedent out the window. They won't care. They won't understand how this will snowball down the road. And I think it's unfortunate because that emotional reaction to a very serious thing that could then come down on every single one of you out there. Ignoring this means that you are ignoring what they could use, utilizing what they're already, the restrictions they are already putting in place, what they could use against your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren to come. So I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that what this shows, is probably the correctness of the Grand Inquisitor and the brothers Karamazov, that most people, unless they're educated to a certain threshold, they actually prefer being ruled by a king and a monarch, giving them the game plan to get into heaven. Otherwise, I don't want to be morally accountable for my own actions. Mm-hmm. So they run away from it. Okay, so they just say, somebody else does it. That's their problem, not mine. I just want to be bred in circuses, and I'm satisfied by that. And I think the framers of our Constitution understood that without a certain level of literacy, the country would fall apart. It was what Thomas Jefferson said: you can't be free and ignorant in a state of civilization. It's not going to work. James Madison, knowledge will forever govern ignorance. He said that even if every Athenian citizen was a Socrates, a collection of them all would be a mob. And we have become so disrespectful of education. I'm talking about real education, the understanding history, human nature, benevolence, kindness, language, mastering reading, writing, thinking, as opposed to STEMs where you can send people to the moon, but they don't know what the heck they're going to do there. And like Elon Musk, maybe he could get to Mars, but what would he do there? Contaminate like he's done the United States. The Martians would probably kick him out. We don't want you. And believing that if you just do things that make yourself more proficient in killing, that's somehow an earmark of an increase in civilization. More and more proficiency in killing ourselves on an industrial scale, the better we are. We got the atom bomb, then the hydrogen bomb. Now we got the cyber bombs, and now we got AI to kill everybody even faster without any moral accountability. And I believe it's because our education system is completely destroyed. We don't require any learning of civics. We don't require any learning of philosophy. We don't require any understanding of what are the essentials of separation of powers and due process and why they're there. That the understanding that I could be wrong is essential to being peaceful. You question maybe I'm wrong, got to listen to the other side. All these things are gone. I don't really care about anyone's sexual orientation, but I don't think you need to teach people their sexual orientation in the school. That's kind of comes with a hormone.
Well, Bruce, I hate to say it. I think it's built that way. I mean, I think it's built to make people stupid and weak. The best, most compliant citizenry are the stupid and the weak. And of course, when we're talking about Elon Musk, for example, we had the alternative media calling out brain chips and all that kind of stuff years ago. And now, just like that, Elon Musk comes in and they say, you know what? I don't mind having a chip in my brain attached to a Pentagon-funded mesh network, because now that's okay because Elon's doing it. We've seen a complete psychological shift, and this is exactly how that education system is built. They create false victims in order to make people then fight back against a false victimhood and then accept things that they would not usually accept.
They want to train worker bees. That's it.
Yeah.
But the parents are the ones who should be pushing back. The parents should say, and they're doing the opposite. I mean, why are you focusing on getting books out of libraries? I'm focused on getting books in libraries that are not there. They should have Montaigne. They should have Socrates. They should have Plato. They should have Aristotle. They should have Shakespeare. They should have Voltaire. They have Rousseau. Where are these books? They're no place. You got this garbage in there. This is juvenile stuff. That's worthy of a 7-year-old, maybe a 3-year-old. Mm-hmm. And they're worried about getting the book. No, you need more books in, not out. And the parents are so passive; they let their kids be taught garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Josh, I'd like to say I'm currently in Mexico City.
Oh, great! I'm in Puerto Vallarta.
So,
By the way, the least conservative place in Mexico, but it's still way more conservative than most conservative strongholds in the United States.
and I want to echo says I've said numerous times that really the seed capital for the cartels comes from the U.S. government. Their operating cash flow comes from the U.S. consumer. And their weapons come from U.S. arms manufacturers and U.S. arms sellers.
Yeah, it's a problem reaction solution. And a lot of the deadly drugs and pharmaceuticals that end up in the hands of youth in the United States is shipped in from China to the Mexican border through the CIA and over the border and then given to and distributed among drug dealers. Very little fentanyl problems in Mexico. Interestingly, they say it's coming from Mexico. So it's weird that it's not really happening here. Well, then we find out that Wuhan, China is actually one of the biggest manufacturing cities of fentanyl in the world. And they have planes going to northern Mexico on a regular basis. And the only parts of Mexico that there seem to be issues with fentanyl is where they're being shipped directly to from China. And then suddenly we have this big problem in the United States with fentanyl. This stuff is very manufactured. And now they're saying they found IEDs on the Mexican border. They say that they have Russian writing on them. I mean, it's complete garbage. The Russian and Chinese government have military parades in Monterrey, Mexico every year. And now they're trying to say, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, hey, Russia is going to attack the United States through Mexico. And if it's not Russia, it'll be China or Iran, and just creating the normalization of this idea that, of course, eventually we're going to have to be in a ground war with Mexico. And it drives me crazy because people fall for it. The left falls for one kind of warmongering propaganda piece, and then the right falls for the other side. And, you know, I've read enough of history to know where they're going just based on the propaganda that they're putting out on a day-to-day basis. This idea that the Mexican cartels are run by Russia is hilarious because we know that they have been directly armed and funded by the U.S. There's Operation Fast and Furious. We have Iran-Contra. I know, Bruce, you actually did some work on that years ago.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. But see, that's why I think, you know, the motto of our so-called national security state is, well, it's unfortunate to lose a friend, but a disaster to lose an enemy. If you lose one, you got to make them up really fast. You know, It doesn't have to be genuine, but that's the biggest component you have. I mean, I'm told that you have a special unit in the Pentagon who's supposed to think up, you know, these crazy threats in the future to get more money extracted from Congress to the White House.
Well, as a matter of fact,
it keeps going up.
There's a 1986 CIA document called "Bringing Real Arms to Bear in Syria," and it was about overthrowing Assad and utilizing the borders of Iraq, Lebanon, and Turkey to then invade using proxy soldiers to then overthrow the Assad government, at that time Assad Senior, and then go after the Alawites, the Sunnis, and the Christians. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. And you could read it like a script from 1986 right on the CIA's website.
It was alleged that Trump, one of his ideas early in his administration was to nuke North Korea and then blame it on somebody else. Well,
it's all about problem, reaction, solution, repeat, right? The Hegelian dialectic has always been in play because that's the way you can perpetuate these crises forever and keep people always in a state of stress, anxiety, and fear, and continuously be able to manipulate them and utilize that fear to bring in further orders and restrictions that people will accept, which they did in Soviet Russia, which they did in Nazi Germany, which they've done in South Africa, and they've done across the board in hundreds of times throughout history, Roman edicts by Diocletian. I mean, it goes back a long ways. We've been witnessing this for a long time. Just create a problem. Everyone will sit on their hands if they think that this hero coming from the state that caused the problem in the first place is going to save them.
Yeah, I mean, I
always insist that the most effective thing government does is sell fear. Okay. So that is
most efficient versus a DMV. You look at complete inefficiency, and then suddenly they come up with something as efficient as the propaganda psychological campaigns that they put out across the board, which they use the Trilateral Commission for. They've used the Tavistock Institute in the past through Britain to do this kind of stuff and manipulate the public. And of course, it's the only thing they're really efficient at: killing people and lying to the public and causing fear. It really tells you, where we're at as human beings when we just blindly accept that.
Yeah, and that was Hermann Goering once went to the Reich just before. I apologize, Jeffrey, but I just wanted to know Hermann Goering for the Reichstag before World War II. He said, "Oh, it's easy to get people to get into war, even though they're not for it. You just say we're immediately in danger, and you're not a patriot if you don't fight. And whether you're a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or communist, everyone will be for it." That's Hermann Goering.
Yeah, or else they're gonna.
So I want to cut off because I have some questions from the audience, so I want to get to their questions.
Absolutely.
There are 3 questions. The first one, I'm going to cite the question. I'll answer it myself, and then I will leave the other 2 up to the 2 of you. The one question is, what would Trump need to do to get a 3rd term? I have an answer for that. Okay, my answer is very simple. Okay, anyone who challenges to run for president, as an official act, he has them assassinated. And if enough people challenge him and he gets them assassinated as official acts, that basically he'll get to the point where nobody will want to run to challenge him as president. And so by default, he'll stay in the White House because nobody will challenge him because he'll just assassinate all the challenges. And John Roberts and Alito and Gorsuch and Thomas will say, that's an official act. We can't opine on it. We can't judge it. He's president. It's official act. Okay. And, and these people could also be alien enemies. Who knows? So, so we don't even know whether we have the jurisdiction to even say anything about this. So it seems to be pretty easy for him to get a 3rd term. Just assassinate everyone who challenges him for office and have the Republicans sit and and of course the Republicans would not impeach him because he's saving the country. So, and of course the MAGA people will also believe he's saving the country. So I think he's got a pretty easy route to staying in president for a 3rd and 4th term. He could just keep assassinating anyone it challenges. And I believe that 90% of MAGA would support it. Okay. And the Supreme Court has already said these are official acts. And so they can't opine on it. They can't do anything about it. So, and it's easy to own the Republican Party. If any leader challenges him, he'll just assassinate that person. And then eventually he'll silence the whole Republican Party from ever challenging him. So he can stay in power as long as he wants. And that strategy, okay, that strategy has been endorsed by the Supreme Court. Okay. So
I want to point out, Jeffrey, that people have this false belief that presidents can't have 3rd terms. And by the way, we've heard of people thought Bush was going to seek a 3rd term. People thought Obama was going to seek a 3rd term. But in this case, it seems more likely because, in a time of crisis, we could look at FDR. I mean, in a time of crisis, you can get the mandate to have a 3rd term quite easily. And people have this long-held belief that presidents can only have 2 terms. In a time of emergency, there's a lot of crazy things that can be done, the least of which is just a 3rd term for the president.
Well, but number one, the language of the Constitution specifically avoids the term emergency. It doesn't exist. Emergency powers are just an inventive. It's a fiction. Secondly, the language is totally unambiguous. The 22nd Amendment says, no person shall be elected to the office of the presidency more than twice. And then the 12th Amendment, if he tried to smuggle in through the vice presidency and having the president step aside, says no one can run for vice president if they would be disqualified from being president. So all we have is a situation where the law is meaningless. You could get an executive order like he did with regard to birthright citizenship saying, I'm repealing the 22nd Amendment by executive order. And then I want to underscore for the audience that Jeffrey is not exaggerating about assassinations. In her dissenting opinion, which was not challenged by the majority in Trump versus United States, Justice Sotomayor hypothesized under the majority opinion, Mr. Trump tasked SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his opponent, immune. That was not challenged by the majority opinion. So this is not trying to take poetic license with what the court did. This is exactly what it did do.
Yes, I'm not saying that Trump would actually do it. I'm saying basically is that if you read the transcript of it, this scenario was pointed out, and no one said, this is absurd. No, it's not contemplated. They were silent on it. And why were they silent on it? They're silent on it basically because they think, well, we understand our ruling permits exactly that scenario, but nobody will actually believe he'll actually do that. Okay. But I think history has shown us you should never be surprised at what Trump is prepared to do. So I'm not saying he's going to do it, but I'm also saying if he does it, nobody should be surprised. Okay. So because he's already shown to what lengths he's willing to go to and at least now he's in a better position now than he was his first term, because in his first term he didn't have this ruling that granted him, he had a doubt whether he'd have this type of immunity. Now he's been told he has that type of immunity. So the question is what is he prepared to do? And what will people find acceptable? And so far what we've seen is whatever he does, the MAGA crowd finds acceptable. Whatever he does, okay? Without question, okay? That's an empirical fact, okay? All we need to do is there's enough observation out there that whatever he says and whatever he does, okay, they accept.
They'll get angry and then forget 2 weeks later.
Yes. So I want to get to the other questions because we're even getting more questions in. So here I'm throwing this out. Why are there so many Jewish groups who promote censorship on the internet? I'm thinking of groups like the ADL. Anyone wants to take that question?
Well, I mean, since the 1940s, I can't think of any group that has put forward more censorship organizations than Jewish organizations have. I mean, the question is a tricky one because it gets into a territory where you're like, okay, there's a group that believes that they're victims of something, and therefore they feel like they need to stop other people from saying things, or else they might become further victims. We've seen that it's not just Jewish groups, by the way. We've seen also a lot of African American organizations. It comes from a place of self-victimhood and this idea of we're going to be under attack because of our past, or because of our ideological belief, or whatever it might be, or because these evil white guys are going to come and burn down our synagogue. And the reality is kind of the opposite, because if there's any group of people that is more controversial to criticize, it would be Jewish people. I mean, I can't think of any group that is more controversial when it comes to actual criticism. And it comes from one of the smallest populations of major religions in the world. So it is a question worth asking. And honestly, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, called me an anti-Semite years ago because I said I didn't support the Israeli-Palestine conflict and what Israel was doing, and that was back in 2014. And of course, because now people believe everything just started on October 7th. There's been a lot of stuff happening for many decades over there since 1948 specifically. But again, we have these groups. It's not just that. It's the Southern Poverty Law Center has a huge Jewish faction as well. And I see why people are asking these questions, because Jewish people tend to be more conservative, generally speaking. Yet at the same time, you have these groups that are going after people for daring to criticize the push for trans children. And it's kind of strange because it's the same group that is also going after people, calling them anti-Semites and blanketly. I think the whole idea is to just censor people in general and keep people.
Listen, this goes back to the oppressed become the oppressors as soon as they get a chance. So when you're in the minority and weak, then you're all in favor of free speech and indulgence. As soon as you become powerful, then you're all in favor of clubbing baby seals to make sure that they have nothing to say against you. So it shows that they only are in favor of free speech when it suits their purposes. And then that's not suits their purposes. And so they want to go after the pro-Palestinian voices. Then they turn against free speech. It goes back, I say, to you need a literate, sophisticated, educated society to understand that if you don't stick by these principles in good times and bad, you're going to be destroyed yourself. And it goes back to Pastor Niemöller's observation after he had spent time in a Nazi concentration camp. He said, first they came for the trade unionists, and I said nothing. Then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing. Then they came for the Christians, and I said nothing. Then they came for me, and there was nobody to speak for me. So if you don't stand up for the principle, it's just a matter of time. When you're not in power, you will be crushed. The whole reason why we have the principles is to try to keep civilization alive and not simply have the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. and be reduced to the animal kingdom, which is where we're going right now.
And you know, if I could just make one quick point there, you mentioned the, you know, again, the oppressed becoming the oppressor. And in regards to the question here, it might be a controversial viewpoint, but when a group has been kicked out of 109 countries, they will feel the most oppressed. Therefore, they will become, in many cases, the greater oppressor. Again, if you want to scale it, the groups that have been in that situation the most times will then, in turn, on many occasions, and we've seen this throughout history, form the biggest groups against the rest of the population. Now, I'm not saying that against all Jews or anything, but it certainly is a trend that is unavoidable when you look at a lot of these censorship groups, and that might have something to do with it. 109 countries is no small amount of countries to be kicked out of.
No, I don't want to pick on the Jews because I think it's an aspect of human nature. When the Christians were a minority, they're all in favor of turning the other cheek, the Sermon on the Mount. Then when the Roman Empire becomes Christian, they kill all the pagans. They do the Crusades to kill the Jews and the Muslims in Jerusalem. Absolutely. So it's the same story. And I don't want to pick on Christians either. I've been in situations where Buddhists, we have this impression that they're all self-effacing and very, very peaceful people, but they're all against the temples and the churches as soon as they got power in Sri Lanka, commit genocide. But it's this thing that we have to guard ourselves from. That's why we need to inculcate these principles. Otherwise, we're going to go down the path and we're going to destroy ourselves. And it's going to be our own. It's our own handiwork. It's what Abe Lincoln said. We'll die by suicide, not because the Chinese or the Russians going to come here.
Absolutely.
And we're dying by suicide very fast by abandoning all of our principles.
Of the you know, in the Enlightenment philosophers, my favorite is Spinoza. And I think that basically, if we really try and practice, you know, ethical moral philosophy, you know, then we should judge each person as an individual. You know, just like the nation state, you know, is a man-made fabrication. You know, it's religion ultimately. You know, I'm Jewish. I'm proud of being Jewish. I got bar mitzvahed. I don't go to synagogue. But you know, I like to be viewed as Jeffrey Wernick, independent of being an American, independent of being a Jew, independent of being white, independent of being male. Okay, I want to be judged by, as Martin Luther King talked about, the content of my character, and my character is a unique individual character, as is everyone else's character is unique and individual. So,
well, that's absolutely right. And I mean, I'm Christian, and I believe in someone's right to criticize and say Christianity is a terrible religion if they want to. I don't agree with them, but everyone has a right to do these things. And I think one of the things where we've had a major misstep in the past couple decades here is this idea that if you don't like, or if someone doesn't like something you are, that you must then silence them. The more free speech we have on this issue, the less pushback we have. In Russia, we could take an example from the October Revolution, and it wasn't just people rising up against capitalists; it was people rising up against, you know, the religious sects, and they obliterated them after, because there was way too much censorship of people criticizing these religions under the Tsar, and then in comes a far more tyrannical enemy that comes in and destroys most religions and tries to make themselves the god in being the state. And that is a great lesson to learn from the Soviet Union. If you are to push on people and say you cannot criticize this religion or this ideology or this theology, whatever it might be, then you are just asking for, in 10, 15 years, for enough people to feel again like the oppressed and then become the oppressor and then shift into attacking you.
Well, the perverse thing, and I think, and again, I don't want to just attack Jews, because you know, you know, hypocrisy is prevalent everywhere. Sure. But you know, one of the sayings of you know, the golden rule, according to Rabbi Hillel, which predates, you know, Jesus's you know, golden rule, is basically that you don't want to do things to other people in a way that you would not want them done to yourself. So don't impose yourself in a way on another person the way you'd like to be imposed upon. Mm-hmm. So I you know, so and he basically said that was all of Torah. Okay, the rest was just commentary. So he basically described that as the essence of Judaism. is respect people the way you want to be respected. So if you want to censor other people, you should not be offended if other people want to censor you, and then we'll be censoring each other, and then pretty soon there'll be the death of conversation because everybody will be censoring everything they don't like and they don't agree with.
Yeah.
So if it's okay for me to censor you, it's okay for you to censor me, and it's okay for everyone to censor each other, and then we live in a world where, which maybe many people would like, is that the only people they would talk to is themselves.
And by the way, the golden rule has been forgotten in most religions.
I think, I believe the beginning of civilization, when the first persons thought, I could be wrong. But when you say I could be wrong, then you want to listen. Maybe somebody else is right, but you have to have that humility. They say that's the building block of civilization. I could be wrong. I need to listen. I always taught my kids and tell people, I will only be angry at you if you are silent and don't. If I think I'm wrong, you need to tell me. I won't get angry. I need to listen. Maybe I'll learn something, but maybe I won't. And that questioning has to be part of the ethos. It has to be inculcated as one of the most important building blocks.
Which is why it's important to listen to things you don't agree with, because there is a potential that you could be wrong. Yeah. Everybody is going to be wrong about a lot of things. And the only way you learn that you're potentially wrong about something is listening to people who will tell you you're wrong.
So, and Jeffrey, you mentioned...
It's not helpful. Go ahead, Josh.
Well, you mentioned the golden rule there, and the golden rule is true among all Abrahamic religions. And like any religion, you're going to have a lot of people that say they believe in something, and among those people, there's going to be a great amount of them that will not follow the actual, theology that they claim or they espouse. So, of course, we're going to see people not follow the golden rule in any Abrahamic religion, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, and of course, that's something that's human nature. And of course,
then it's a cult devoid of beliefs. It's
absolutely
like the same thing of Americans who don't believe in the Constitution, but they love the flag, but they don't believe in anything. They're just basically engaging, in idol worship.
Yeah.
So so it's the same thing that most of us are in cults. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's one of the ways I actually woke up, Jeffrey.
We're in cults.
One of the things I was about 12 years old and I got into Marx and all this kind of stuff that is best left for children, but nonetheless, it's something that everyone needs to read through and kind of understand. I've read, all the Leninist writings. I've read Hitler's. I've read everything because it was important to understand and discern and break it down and know what I was talking about in order to, break down these barriers that are created by these ideologies. And one of the things that I always felt was so important, and very few people do, is, I remember finding Dr. Ron Paul back in 2006 and thinking, I love this guy. He has to be wrong about something. And he, of course, there are nuances there, but I looked everywhere. I put everything up against him. And that's how I actually developed a more libertarian ideology, was like, wait, I can't really debate this. And I'm reading everyone else's counter argument. And I can't really break a lot of this stuff. And therefore, that's where I kind of came from, that ideology. But it took me looking and delving into everything I possibly could that would debunk what I believed. And after that, I debunked a few things, but you tweak things every now and then. You learn something new every week, hopefully. But with that, most people today, they go to a university course, they get told something, or they go on Twitter and they see a bunch of stuff promoted by the algorithm, whichever way it might be. They learn from these opposing viewpoints that they never actually try to clash together, and they never try to actually break down. And that's a big part of the unfortunate nature of this world, where we have so much news and so much information, and most of it's wrong and a little bit of it's right, and we can't find it among the pieces. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people are.
Just for everybody, I worked on Ron Paul's 2012 presidential campaign, senior advisor. Worked with American Empire before the fall. Yeah, he was the one, and he deserves great credit, because he began making these views known when he was viewed as fringe. There was nothing in it for him. He did just because it was the right thing to do. The first one who said, we can't be at war, the president says we're at war. But I want to go, on religion. I actually have on my Substack site, I had Bruce Fein's 10 Commandments, because I believe that the golden rule is wonderful, but I think that there are affirmative obligations we have in living the right life, being benevolent, being kind, always searching for wisdom, helping other people, trying to fight injustice. So the golden rule is more of a negative precepts, what you don't do. But what about what you do? Because there's so much evil in the world that we both understand. We all understand. You got to fight injustice. Otherwise, all we are is back to the animal kingdom. Say the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. And that is very important because we know if you just let the natural order of things, animal kingdom, operate, it's going to be monarchy, it's going to be oppression, very hierarchical. Just who's strong and has the physical force will dominate. And we do not want to go there. The reason why we have brains, a cerebral capacity, is so we don't have to live in bondage to our hormonal instincts that we inherit when we were born, right? That's why we have education. And this is what we've totally lost and is alien from our culture.
Yeah,
and you're exactly right.
I think when you say that, I say, like in business, when some people have asked me some advice about business, I say, I do not have a predatory personality. So while I'm a tough negotiator, I pride myself in being decent and fair, and I want to do deals that are mutually good, because if they're not mutually good, they won't sustain, and you want relationships to sustain. But I tell people, if you're not good at being a predator, then the only way to avoid being prey is being good at recognizing a predator. So I've tried to live my life staying away from people who are predators, and because I don't want to be a predator, but I also don't want to be prey. So the only way to avoid being prey is if you're not a predator, is to be able to recognize a predator. I have another question. I have two other questions. What strategies do cartels employ to infiltrate or manipulate government institutions, and how does this impact Mexico's ability to enforce the rule of law?
Well, I hope this person knows that I live in Mexico, so I have to be careful how I answer that. But I will say it's not by my own witnessing, but it is true that these things are infiltrated, but they're often separated because, of course, right now what we see is Claudia Sheinbaum, the current president of Mexico, has been obeying Trump essentially and cracking down a lot on the cartels, which a lot of people would say that's a great thing. But when the West arms and funds them in the first place, it's a nuanced issue. What we're seeing right now is a lot of violence increasing in small areas, not in big cities necessarily, but in small towns and areas where there's strongholds. And of course, then suddenly the military that were shaking hands with the cartel yesterday and taking money from them are now killing them. And it creates a very untrusting environment, which could snowball into a lot of unfortunate cartel wars later on down the road. Especially, the last thing you want is another Acapulco. Acapulco was the place to be in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And then around the 80s and then the 90s, the cartel wars exploded there. And I was there about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. I still love the place, but it's a shell of what it used to be. And, long gone are the days of Frank Sinatra, hanging out at a club and doing a residency there. Yeah. It's at this point, it's kind of scary. And that actually stemmed a lot from these cartel wars, which I believe were completely manufactured. And we're starting to see a bit of that happen today. How do they influence political figures? Well, they don't even have to talk to them. In a lot of cases, you're running an election, that there's certain things you can't do. And that goes for a lot of people that are blackmailed in the United States in politics, honestly. But in Mexico, if you were to say, we're going to bring down the cartel on television, and you're actually serious about it, not just saying things, and you have not talked to them and you have not been in that situation, very dangerous situation to be in. Generally, they leave people alone. Where I am anyway, it's voluntary. They don't force businesses to pay. It just means if you pay, they're not going to go after, the police aren't going to come, because the police and them are working hand in hand, and the police might come and raid your business or make you pay them a bunch of money for little regulatory issues that you're not following, to a T. That can happen. I've seen that happen. But generally where I am, it's totally voluntary. They're not going up to businesses and saying, give me your money or else. So it depends on where you are in Mexico. There are parts of Mexico that are extremely strict, and parts that, honestly, where I am in Puerto Vallarta, all they want is tourism to come in, because that's where they get their money from. So the last thing they want to do is cause violence and danger. And if anything, they protect people here. It sounds crazy, I know, but versus the police who will round you up, throw you in the back of a truck, beat you up and demand money. And if you don't have money, you're going to get beaten up for a little bit longer and thrown off onto the street. So, if we're going to look at as black and white, I would say the white side of it would be, well, if they are going to say, if a tourist is hurt, that's going to lose us millions of dollars. And if a tourist is hurt, it's not going to hurt the police at all. Then we know who is going to be more beneficial to the average tourist. So I think that's usually the issue, is people worry about as a tourist going to Mexico, but it's very far from the danger that you see on television.
I think there's also always the law that almost everybody ignores, to their peril, called the law of unintended consequences. Okay, mm-hmm. Americans have been big consumers of drugs for a long period of time. So drug dealers view it as a business. There's a demand for a product, and they're supplying a product that people want. Okay, so they're not creating the demand; they're responding to the demand. Okay, so the biggest demanders of drugs are Americans. Okay, not the fault of Mexicans, not the fault of the Colombians. So what happened? Colombia was the big supplier of drugs into the United States. So Colombia told the United States, come in, bring your troops, assassinate all the people you want to assassinate. So we're no longer the source of, feeding drugs into the United States. So what happened? The drug trafficking went from Colombia to Mexico. That's all it did. Did it keep the drugs out of the United States? No, it didn't. People innovate. Whenever there's a demand for a product, and the demand for drugs is humongous, okay, people are going to figure out a way to supply it, okay? Human nature, okay? And there's demand. And as I've tried to point out, in the past, there's so much of a demand for drugs that the cartels here, have a budget, an operating budget, comparable to the operating budget of the Mexican government. So
and then some.
Yeah, but where do they get the money from? From Americans. All the money, all the weapons, they all come from the United States. Okay. And there used to be, I don't know if it's the case anymore, but there used to be a case. I remember speaking years ago with Ed Koch, in New York. And he used to say, we don't really want to do too much against drugs. I said, why not? He said, you know what? Every time we have a big interdiction where we take a lot of drugs off the market, all that happens is there's low supply, prices rise, but demand for drugs is inelastic. So whoever's got an addiction wants their drugs. Yeah. So if they can't get their drugs, if the price goes up, it's not like they say, oh, gee, I'm not going to buy my drug today. It's that a lot more crimes were committed because they wanted to fund their drug thing. So every time there was a negative shock to supply in the market, crime went up a lot. So the people were pissed off. So the residents sit back and say, gee, you know what? If people going out buying drugs, not committing crimes, or having the price raised a lot, less supply, so this is a product that is the demand is pretty inelastic. So it's a difficult problem to solve when you have something that is an inelastic demand, and people want it. And if they can't get it through the money they produce on their own, then they're going to commit crimes to get the money to satisfy, their craving.
You think we learn
it might not be that committed, and then we also don't know how many people are paid off in the United States, who make money off of how corrupt it is. Why are there not major arrests of drug cartel leaders in the United States?
Well, I mean, MS-13 is from the United States.
Even though the biggest market, who should believe that the biggest market in the U.S. is in the U.S., yet there's no senior capo in the drug cartel in the United States, okay? So where are the major findings of money laundering and all this type of stuff? So tell me how many major, Mexico just sent over a whole bunch of people, like 20-something. Where are the big cartel leaders in the United States being arrested? Where are the big operations of money laundering of these cartels being discovered? Because the money's in the U.S., and if they're going to be distributing all the product in the U.S., one would assume they'd have some pretty senior people operating these businesses in the U.S.
I was going to say it's in Washington, D.C.
Jeffrey, we've seen this rodeo before. It was called prohibition. We know the stupidity, right?
Yes.
At least at that time, we had the sense to repeal it, after 14 years. But we saw the same phenomenon. How come we got Al Capone? Prohibition. And Joe Kennedy too, right? So it's just that the old generation, drank too much, so they got the support to repeal prohibition. not, I guess fentanyl doesn't used by the people with a lot of voting clout, so they can't get the repeal of these stupid laws. But the great irony of the West somehow being so sanctimonious about the drug traffickers and the abusers. It reminds me of the opium wars that the West fought against China. They went to war to force opium down the throats of the Chinese. They didn't want it and said, no, you have to have them because we need it in order to overcome the trade imbalance that was coming because we were buying too much from China and not selling enough. So we had 2 opium wars. This is all viewed greatness and it's part of showing that we are superior to the Chinese civilization that we had to get rid of. Really, I mean, the hypocrisy is truly limitless, but it underscores how West now has totally lost any foundation for saying Western civilization is suddenly the high water mark of the species. It reminds me of a comment that Mahatma Gandhi once was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, it's a good idea if you actually tried it.
Going to that, Bruce, and talking about your topic now, because a lot of this behavior occurs because of ignorance. So the other question, given the comments you made before, somebody's asking, are there examples of successful integration between classical and modern educational approaches that could serve as models for reform? So what would you do if you were put in charge of education? What would you do to improve the education system?
Well, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think the education system even wasn't so formalized, at the time of the founding, even up to Abe Lincoln. You read the classics, you have Socratic dialogue, it's all there. You talk about philosophy, what's the right thing to do? Why do we exist? What is just, what is not just? Have them read Montaigne, have them read Shakespeare, have them read history, that understand human nature, that they understand the purpose of education is not to make money, it's to acquire justice. That's the purpose. And James Madison said, the purpose of civil society, the civil life of government is justice. And our education system should be all devoted to inculcating the art of critical thinking, exposing everyone to the history of the species, why we are, and why and how can we make the world a more angelic, benevolent, peaceful place, despite the fact that the species is geared towards proficiency in killing. It all be focused on the reading and the classics so that until they understand why we exist and what the goal of a civilization is, they don't go to STEM and learning atoms and how to kill people more proficiently. Science is wonderful. Amenities in life are wonderful, but without an understanding of virtue, it's all, in my judgment, completely without value.
Yeah, if we take a look at like the wisdom of, like if you would go into Jefferson's library or Madison's library, the libraries of the people that created to that point in time, the greatest document, for people trying to engage in an exercise in mostly self-government. So what did they read? So if you take a look at like the great, Enlightenment thinkers and going back to the Greeks, and the Romans and the Socratic dialogues and a lot of the Aristotelian philosophers that were in Spain, during when the Moors and Muslims ruled Spain. I mean, these people addressed the type of questions that you mentioned, Bruce. It was not a matter of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then take a cooking class and a sex ed class and go to gym and then take all these other courses based upon people's grievances, and they want to get spoon-fed stuff that they like to hear because they feel very, very, very aggrieved. The U.S. is a very made as a country made up of, and MAGA big. MAGA movement is a whiny movement. Okay, everybody in the MAGA movement is somebody who feels aggrieved and a victim. So as much as they hate, as much as they claim that it's a macho movement about strength, it's really a movement about weaknesses, who want to be bullies. Okay.
Well, we have that on either side. The people on the left for years called you a Nazi if you were supportive of Trump, and then the people among the Trump supporters will call you a libtard if you are against him, and in any way, shape, or form if you're just consistent on an issue. But I like to think of the ideas of the late John Taylor Gatto when it comes to homeschooling, though obviously that's not going to be uniform for everyone, because one of the things is every child has a different direction. And unfortunately, the school system is built so that every child must have the same direction. They're all put in the same basket. Everyone has to be the same. And it's color coded. And it's unfortunate because, it destroys the most important developmental period of a child's life, or of a human being's life, is that period of time, especially between ages 5 and about 14 or 15, where people become themselves. They become the person they're going to be for the rest of their life. And unfortunately, when everyone is pushed into this one size fits all approach to schooling, unfortunately, we deal with what we see today in a lot of cases, everyone conforming to the social construct, which they believe that they must be part of, or else if they step out of line, then they're not going to be accepted. So we have the MAGA people, we have the social justice warrior people, and you have that on both sides. And I think that obviously, again, this is nothing against women working. Obviously, I just want to point out what the tax system did all those years ago when they took women out of the house and put them to work so that the IRS could make more money. And of course, women should be independent, men should be independent, all human beings should be independent and do what they wish in life. But there was a concerted effort to split up the family. And today we have children that are spending more time with a public school teacher than they do with their own parents. So then you have to ask, who is really raising the child, the government or the parents? So we need a more independent approach, in my opinion. I support homeschooling, but I also understand that doesn't work for everyone. But there needs to be an approach, at least reforming it to some degree back to what it was like in the late 1890s, early 1900s, with obviously updated information.
Yeah, but to my mind, the most important schooling comes outside the classroom. It's part of your life. Mm-hmm. It's with friends, it's with adults. You're reading books, you're talking about it, because that's why we have brains. Now, I have, for anybody on this program, I have the 100 books that I think everybody should read. It's on my website. It's on my Substack account. The beginning, to read about philosophy, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, Shakespeare. You need to read Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. Anyway, you'll get the full exposure if you start reading those books. I could make it 200, but I had to cut it in order to make it more manageable, I believe. But I think it's wrong to think about education being sitting in a classroom. Education is part of living. It's like Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living, Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'll tell you my own experience, okay? In 5th grade, I had a teacher that asked us to, Mr. DeSantis, Ralph DeSantis. And one of the things he did, he asked the group to create a class constitution. So I started reading the Constitution, and I got really absorbed in, the writings of our founding generation. So I started reading, and I started a practice of reading, 2 books a week. So I started reading. So when I got to school, in other classes, I would start asking questions, and the teachers thought I was a pain in the neck for asking questions. So they wanted to shut me up. One teacher put tape over my mouth so I couldn't speak during class because I was asking too many questions. So in education, the worst thing to do in an education environment is actually to ask a question. I learned that lesson, apparently, is to don't ask a question. So then I would start reading books. I'd come to my class and I'd read books, and then my teachers would start persecuting me because I wasn't paying attention to class. So I would tell the teachers, I don't need to listen to you. I'm learning more by reading a book than listening to you. So of course I got sent to punished all the time by my teachers. So what did my teachers do? So my teachers ended up like saying, okay, all your exams are A's, but your class participation is an F. So I'm going to give you a C. So apparently they balanced off the fact that even though I learned everything I'm supposed to learn, in most of my classes, I was the highest score in every exam. But even if I learned that, then they would still say, well, you're not participating in class. Well, if I ask a question, you're not letting me ask questions, so I'm kind of confused what it means to be class participation. Class participation doesn't seem to me that I ask questions or interact with you. Class participation, in your opinion, means I'm a passive listener of your bullshit. So so I actually had to go to the principal of the school to have my grades adjusted, because I said, you're screwing up my ability to get into a good college. There's a difference. You could say I'm a C student or an A student with an attitude problem. So my grades should say I'm an A student with an attitude problem, not a C student, but you want to tell the world I'm a C student when I'm not a C student, I'm an A student, and you with an A student whose attitude you hate to have in the classroom. So, my point is, ultimately, if you want to learn, it's an individual responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, Jeffrey, I want to say something that I really relate on with that, because I left school in 9th grade. I went back, did my GED later without studying, aced it, and got 98% on it. I was at the top of many of my classes in high school, and I quit before I finished 9th grade. I'm one of the most successful people that's come from that school. That's not a pat on the back. It's that, of course, I had direction, and I felt the need to read books outside of the learning curriculum that I was being told. Again, there's a lot of people I would not suggest this for because they don't have that direction yet, but it worked out very well for me. And when I went to leave school in 9th grade, I was brought to the principal and they said, why are you leaving? And I said, one of my teachers was there. I said, well, I'm being indoctrinated. I could feel myself being indoctrinated. I have my own views. I have my own path I want to take. I love learning. I love reading books, but you guys are indoctrinating me. And I know that you guys are doing this. And the teacher looked at me and says, sorry, what does indoctrination mean? And I said, okay, thank you. All right. And never went back, and ended up doing my GED a few years later. Not a little bit of studying done at all. I just showed up, did it, and it was fine. It wasn't the lack of intelligence. It was a lack of direction in that place. I felt like I'd already been educated enough at the age of 14 and a half, 15. I was wrong on that, but generally I was able to figure out where I wanted to direct my energies to, because again, that period of time in your teen years is so important to absorbing information that I wanted to spend it reading economics books, reading, these philosophers, reading people like Dr. Ron Paul, for example, reading these people that influenced me heavily at that time, and delve into that information rather than what I felt wasting my time learning about the pioneers, which I'd already learned way too much about. It was, frustrating after a while hearing the government version of how some pioneers walked down a river, and I was bored by it. I wanted to learn something that was actually beneficial to me long term, and luckily it was. And I look back, and the people that were doing the best in school being indoctrinated are either in debt from university and can't get a job after, or are working at a McDonald's. And it really felt like I dodged a bullet there, because remember, I'm in my 30s, so this is an educational system that is far, far worse than what like the other of you two had when you were younger. It was the indoctrination that they promote in schools, even in the 90s and 2000s, it was incredible. And now skip forward to today.
There was a study done of the top universities, University of Chicago, where I went to undergraduate and graduate school, participated in, and they took, the top universities in the country, and they took the fact that they followed a cohort of students, based upon like their GPAs. Mm-hmm. So they found that the best performing cohorts of the classes were people who were basically B- students. So the people who were the highest grades made good employees, but they were not entrepreneurs. So they collected a paycheck on the most part. I mean, it's not true always the case, but on the most part, that's the case, is that those that sit in the front of the classroom doing the homework, having their books perfect in order and everything neat, listening to every word the teacher has to say, questioning nothing, just trying to be a sponge and absorb everything without questioning anything, so.
And that's not learning. That's just repeating. That's memorizing at that point.
That's learning what the teacher wants you to know. If you think that's all the knowledge you need to know is what the teacher wants you to know. Like there's no knowledge beyond what the teacher wants you to know, because the teacher probably is wrong about a lot of things, and there's a lot of knowledge outside the knowledge contained by that teacher. So ultimately, if you want to excel at something, it's like sports. Sports, great musicians, great sports, they practice all the time. So practice. If you want to excel at something, there's no easy path to success. You gotta be willing to work your ass off. So,
but I think today, Jeffrey, your point about education is an individual responsibility. It's even more true today than when we were growing up. I mean, I would ride bicycles through the rain to the library to check out books and read them. You had to come back to make sure you didn't overstay. Today, you press a button. You have access to all the greatest libraries in the world. You have an Ivy League education for nothing called the internet. Just download the right books and read them. And as instead of that happening, kids go on the internet and do the most juvenile things. They stump their brains by looking at these little kids were fascinated by a 3-year-old putting lipstick on their lips and lips. I mean, this is utterly ridiculous. They have all this great wisdom at their fingertips, and they squander it and waste it because they have to gratify their childish hormones.
What does that say about humanity, though? I mean, when we are dumbing it down so much, when we have all this information, but you can go on a cell phone and spend 8 to 10 hours just scrolling through endless videos of nonsense, of people playing pranks or a cat, jumping or whatever it might be, something silly. People are draining their brain on this in the period of time that they could spend learning a language. I mean, if you just take a month of an average teenager's life online, they can learn an entire language in that time. But instead, what have they learned? Well, they don't remember because they've been scrolling through 20 to 30-second videos for the last month, and they don't even remember what the third last video they saw was. It's draining brains, and unfortunately, it's just lost opportunity.
Yeah, well, I think what it tells about us as a species, one, we're a hormonal species, not a cerebral one. We celebrate and exalt the armored knight, not the thinker. When you go to Greece, Alexander the Great, who knew how to kill, everybody wants to visit his tomb. They even have wars over it with Macedonia. Socrates, nowhere to be seen. Maybe a little, can't see Aristotle, but Bucephalus, the horse, everyone gets excited about the horse, Bucephalus, but not Aristotle. And the other thing is, and why it makes the species even worse, is we have what I call species narcissism. We refuse to recognize how debased the natural order of things is, the hormones. And so we blind ourselves to the necessity of education in order to prevent ourselves from destroying ourselves. You got to overcome the narcissism in order to Trump is a perfect example. Here's a guy who needs education from ground one. His narcissism is so great, he'll never read anything, right? But as a species, it's the same way. You kind of recognize that we have this natural inclination towards killing other people so that we can dominate the territory. We have to arrest ourselves. We got to handcuff ourselves. Otherwise, it's self-destruction. And it's a very sad commentary that we refuse to understand because we're so fragile philosophically. We have to believe that, we're angelic DNA. No, we don't have any angelic DNA. It's all the opposite.
It's funny that you mentioned Trump reading because he was interviewed and asked, he tells everyone he's a Christian, and he was asked to name one line from the Bible, and he oh, it's all good. No, just name one. No, it's okay. Just move on to the next question. It's funny. There's a lot of that out there. And I think a lot of people also will consume information in a microsecond online. Instead of reading an entire book, they'll get what they think is the gist of it, but they don't understand all the nuances of a very complex issue. So they'll get an idea of something from listening to a moment of a podcast where someone mentions a book, and then they will proudly buy the book, put it on their shelf as a trophy and never read it, and then pretend that they know so much about a certain subject.
Yeah.
And
well, you mentioning it, Trump, it was similar with Sarah Palin. She was asked, what was their favorite newspaper? She didn't know. A newspaper once said, oh, I guess all of them.
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, great.
No, and Hubert Humphrey, I remember Hubert Humphrey, he said, this is typical because it's not just the Republican. He said, well, he hadn't had time to read a book in 40 years. I said, wow, he's too busy. He's too busy masterminding everything else. He couldn't have time for a book. If I couldn't live a week. And I think Jeffrey is the same way. If I haven't read 10 books a week, I think my brain is rotting.
Well, I mean, when we have Winston Churchill reading what he said was about 4 to 5 books a week and was in the middle of a world war, I mean, there's really no excuse out there.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that, you made a comment out previously, Josh, that said there's a lot of information out there, and I would disagree with that. There's a lot of noise out there. So I think it becomes the search costs, on the one hand, it's made it easier to publish noise. And the more noise that's produced, the higher search cost there is in seeking out information embedded in the noise. And I just think people are not willing to put in the time and effort to search out information, in a world where so much noise is being produced in such volumes in the way it's being produced.
I completely agree, Jeffrey. I would just say, though,
whenever I speak to people about when they make claims, whether it's a MAGA person or progressive or whatever their political ideology, whenever they say something, I always ask them to cite where they got that from. So, because people use all these adjectives and make all these claims, and then they have no citation to back it up that you can refer to and say, where's the document of authority? Where was the due diligence you made that produced, that statement? One thing is you speculating, and you can explain to me what your speculation is based upon, or the other is you making it a statement as if it's a factual statement. And then the question is, what is the evidence supporting that factual statement? But I find that on the most part, when I do that, people just think I'm a pain in the ass. So,
you're absolutely right about the noise.
People admire that attribute of me.
There is an enormous amount of noise out there, more than ever before, and it's never ending. But there's still a lot of information out there amongst that noise that I know, because I have to, for my work every single day, I'm going through hundreds of pages of information, and I just keep waiting to get to the end of it, and it just keeps coming. It's a never-ending cycle of reading and taking in nonsense, because a lot of it is nonsense. There's information about what's happening in the news, and I have to deconstruct it and think, how does this affect this, and how does that connect to that? And it just never ends. But of course, among that, there's a lot of noise, and a lot of that is based in just propaganda of this side or that side. This person really wants to make their side seem like the most prevalent side, so they're going to promote that and ignore any other information that might contradict what they are saying. And unfortunately, that's most networks. That's CNN, that's Fox News, that is a bunch of the alternative media platforms, a plethora of them, and a lot of it's out of opportunism, and a lot of it's out of what makes them money, and a lot of it is just because they always have to be right, and no one else can deconstruct their argument, and they won't allow anyone to deconstruct their argument.
Yeah, but I think the main point that Jeffrey is making is that the media in general, and information in general, that inflates fleas into elephants and shrinks elephants into fleas. All of wisdom is having a sense of proportion and importance. And they write about stuff that I wouldn't even care about. I mean, the most important thing about this signal talk, my view, is how the heck did we get at war with the Houthis? Where was Congress? Well, you're killing civilians? We're committing war crimes. Not whether X, Y, Z. It's stupid anyway. My view is 99% of all the secrecy is worthless completely. You don't need skiffs. I never heard any intelligence agency ever do anything that ever changed the history of the world.
Well, look at the JFK files.
Yeah. So
I don't know if you went through any of that, but a lot of nonsense.
A lot of nonsense, and I never could have conceived the CIA would actually plant a lot of their intelligence people in the State Department. Oh, no kidding. And we were attempting to fiddle with elections in all these other countries. Oh, no kidding. We think that we're not naive, got born yesterday. That's the classified state secret. But anyway, that's the critical thing out there. That's what I do. And when I look at these stories, I say, okay, well, what is a flea and what is an elephant? There are a handful of elephants that I read. The other stuff, it doesn't matter. I know it's like I have to read whether the Melania had a green hat on or a white hat. I don't need to know that. I don't care about it. I don't want to waste my brain on that. And that's where people who are unintelligent, they don't know how to distinguish between fleas and elephants, and that's a real problem.
People who are intelligent and wise are people who will listen, contemplate, think about, weigh arguments, and then not make a decision until they feel they have adequate information to make an informed judgment. Okay. And again, there's still a risk. You're never going to have all the information you need. You got to look at what the information you can get with reasonable search costs, where at what point in time you think you have enough to make an informed judgment based upon your life experiences. So if we take a look at like how we gather, how do we look to gather information? I always insist that the best process we have for discovering truth, imperfect as it is our legal system. Okay, how does our legal system operate? You got a prosecution, you got a defense, so you're listening to two sides of every story all the time. Everyone should be an impartial juror throughout their life. They should approach their whole life being an impartial juror, open to whatever information that comes, and they should constantly be challenging whatever they think their beliefs are. And what does the judge do? The judge only makes sure that the jury doesn't hear anything that could be perceived as gossip or something like that. They want to make sure that whatever they're listening to can be deemed as being, evidence, some level of proof. So some speculation is allowed, in opening statements, closing statements, and they let experts make some informed opinions. But whatever expert that makes one informed opinion, you can get another expert who can make another informed opinion. So you're always hearing, the jury's always forced to hear mostly things that are specific, valid evidence, and always forced to hear every side to a story before they get to make any judgment. Okay.
I would supplement.
There is no better way of producing. And why do we want that system to be as flawless as possible? Because people's lives at stake, people's safety's at stake, people's freedom are at stake. So people don't want a system that's going to protect them from, false positive and false, more. We don't want innocent people going to jail. So, so we have the system to try and hope that produces that we don't deprive people who did nothing of being imprisoned, and if that means a few guilty people go free, that we're prepared as a society to accept that. Yeah. So
I would just add, Jeffrey, that it seems to me that in approaching this, I certainly accept the legal model as the optimal model with cross-examination and whatever. But what is required, in my judgment, that everyone should become endowed with is understanding human nature and motivations, which is universal across the board for millennia. And that's why you have to read philosophy, because then when you come on an event that's current, you say, well, what are the motivations? What historically, a million times, these people act in the same way? It doesn't matter whether they're a woman or a man, the lust for power, the lust for celebrity, the lust for XYZ. So you understand Iago, and you understand Richard III, and you understand all these figures in history. Yeah, now I understand what human nature is about. It enables you to be much more sophisticated in an understanding, this is probably the motive, because it's happened the same way a million times in the past. It's like the same way you trust the force of gravity. When you do the test and it comes out the same way every time, say, oh yeah, everybody in that situation seems to do the same thing. Recognizing that there's always an exception to the rule, and there can be evidence that may show that this is an exception, but at least you have a foundation, a starting place. Yeah. All right. I mean, like every time that I read anything, I say, who's the author? What are the ulterior motives that he might have for writing something and not saying things exactly as they would? And that's the beginning. And I'm not saying that he's lying, but it has to say that's the starting point. I may not believe this, but maybe there's other corroborating evidence. And that's why it's so important to have this very, very broad education. And I say philosophy to understand what the species is about. And to say the huge portion of that is narcissism that prevents people from understanding the overriding lust or craving, power, celebrity, creature comforts, sex. Great. It's there. And when you understand that, then most of the other stuff you can predict pretty well. And I'll just say, I don't want to sound vain. If you read my book, American Empire, before the fall of 2010, I said exactly this is what's going to happen, because we have this craving to dominate the world. And without knowing any classified information, I said, don't worry. You think it's bad now? It's going to get a lot worse. We're going to go in all these countries where we can go into. And that comes not, I say, from the CIA or anything else, just understanding human nature and not be blinded by narcissism for thinking it's better than it is.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right with the historical. I mean, the context, putting things into the context of historical similarities is so incredibly important to understanding what's happening now. And most just look at it at face value today. And that's a big issue. I think it's the number one thing I think about when I'm trying to get work done, when I'm trying to write a story, when I'm trying to do something on a current situation, a current news story, is to think about where that is placed and where the similarities are in the historical context. And unfortunately, most people are just going on to what's the next thing? How do we scare people? How do we get money? How do we get opportunity, and not actually do benefit the viewer by actually giving them that content?
I have a partial solution to this. Okay, never be implemented, but I have a partial solution. We feel there's so much at stake in trials that everybody who testifies has to agree to testify under oath because what's at stake. Well, if you think about public policy, as a society, a lot more is at stake. For the individual, a lot's at stake for that one individual. What government does, there's a lot at stake for everyone. So you think that there's more at stake, yet people can make statements and lie all they want, even though there seems to be a lot more at risk. So I think that whatever politicians want to say amongst themselves when they're in the Senate or House, let them lie to each other all they want in congressional hearings. But every time they make a statement to the public, every time they go to a town hall, every time they go get interviewed on some network, anytime they're speaking to the public, I think that the part of the oath of office is an oath that is an oath they make to the American people, basically like a witness would do as an oath when they testify in court. And that basically, if anyone can prove that a politician lied, said something that was a lie, knowing that it was a lie, not just saying something that's a mistake, but knowing that there was a lie, because most of the bullshit they say, they know are lies. So it's not as if they're lying out of ignorance. So their lies are intentional.
Jeffrey, think of this irony, because I've appeared before congressional committees on numerous occasions. Okay, you take an oath, witness, but the members don't take an oath. The questioners can lie. You're witness standing before them. You got to tell the truth.
Now let them. Now let them make their statements. Have every citizen have standing. So if they say something, any citizen could say, well, this is a lie. Here's my evidence, and then the policy can go to court and say, well, I didn't think it was a lie. I said it because of this reason. And they're pretty quickly, I think that will change politicians' behaviors on what they say in public when they make the statements that they make.
Well, with those congressional hearings, let's also ask what financial ties the people asking the questions have as well, because there's a lot of that happening.
Yeah, for sure. The ulterior motives, it's all campaign finance. Why'd you call this witness? Why'd you ask that question? Because oftentimes the lobbyists will give them questions. Hey, I want you to ask XYZ for them. Absolutely. That's how I get paid, $20,000 a month retainer for doing XYZ.
I think anyone who runs for public office should have to sell everything they own and hold cash, and that would eliminate. That wouldn't perfectly, then at least you'd know that they would want to have stable prices, because if they have all their money tied up in cash, then if they're inflating, they're making themselves, poor. So I there are a number
Nancy
of
Pelosi does not like the sound of that.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, how about I say put them in treasury bills. Then you got to stake it and let the government solve them so they get paid back. That should be an alternative to cash. You put them in T-bills, right?
No, cash is better because you don't want them to have inflation. And anyway, if we default, then we'll have huge inflation, and they get even much poorer. And I want them to get much poorer as a consequence of their fiscal irresponsibility.
There's something I really want to add real quick there. Bruce was mentioning treasuries. If we got these guys in 10-year treasuries, they would feel panic through their bones on a regular basis and feel the need to do something to protect themselves from the impending doom of having a 10-year treasury these days and the inflation risk that comes with it. I think that would be a good thing, having it in treasuries, because then they'll have to work against inflation. They're going to have to work against the struggles of the American economy rather than ignoring it and cashing out.
Just keep him in cash. You just force them in cash, and every day, their purchasing power is going down and down and down by keeping everything in cash. Keep them in cash, because then they'll figure out how to manipulate Treasury. They might call up the Fed one day and say, go out and buy all these Treasury bills. So cash is less subject to manipulation than Treasuries are.
Yeah.
Can the cash be locked in though?
Jeffrey, I have 3 minutes, and then I have to go to.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Sorry. So Bruce, you want to say your concluding words, and then Josh yours, and thank you so much. I hope everyone had a great time. So Bruce, go ahead.
Well, I just repeat. This is Ted Kennedy that's tried to on an upbeat. The three of us, and we're working, even though we're rather pessimistic. But I just close with his famous lines. The work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, the dream never dies, and that's why we continue to struggle for a fair and juster United States of America.
Here. Josh?
Absolutely. All I have to say is that at the end of the day, what we need to understand is we can't be waiting for other people to make us free. Freedom is individualistic. You determine that on a day-to-day basis, whether you defend it or you don't defend it. And so depending or, expanding on that, don't externalize that freedom to another group that's going to save you later on. Everyone that's complaining most of the time can fix most of their problems themselves and step out of the way, withdraw as much as possible, and focus on bettering their own life from an individualistic standpoint, rather than waiting for Donald Trump to come and save everyone and bring down the deep state that he is paid off by. So anyway, maybe not as positive as Bruce's point, but I think it's a positive overall, outlook here, that people need to stand up as individuals and be a self-determining factor in their own freedoms, rather than offloading the responsibility for this onto the state.
Well, I will say, normally I don't say final words, but I will, given what I've heard from both of you, I'll just quickly say this. You got to focus on what you have control over and ignore the things you have no control over, because that's an exercise in futility. So the only thing you have a control over is yourself and your own activities and how you respond to things and how you react to things. Mm-hmm. So ultimately your life is about what you do with the choices you make. And if you make good choices, no matter who's president, no matter what party is in power, you'll be able to live a happy, prosperous life. Mm-hmm. So there are Democrats prospering during Republican administrations. There are Republicans who are prospering during Democratic administrations. So our prosperity and our happiness is something that's unique inside each of us, and no third party, no one should empower any third party to ever think that they have control over your ability to live your life, on the terms you want to live them, as long as you work to make those things happen.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Jeffrey. Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.